Hello, let's go back in time again. We'll be going back to March, April, BassMaster Magazine, 1972. What's kind of neat about this March, April cover is it's again showing a picture of us weighing fish on stringers. And obviously those fish were probably going to die and be hopefully donated to somebody who needed them food. But the irony of this is that this was 1972 is when they announced that they would no longer keep fish on stringers. You'd have to put them in a live well. But it's so again, it was kind of unusual to look at them still on stringers. But this will probably be one of the last covers that you ever see fish on a stringer. The first picture here, and he's one of the writers that wrote in BASS for several years, Stan Fagerström. He was one of my favorite writers. He did do a lot of fishing. He did do a lot of spending his time on the water. But what I noticed here is he's fishing a bait called a shimmy wiggler. And remember, this is 1972. And I didn't really throw my first buzzbait until 1976. And I won the first BASS tournament ever on a buzzbait, a lunker lure, in 1977. And so, but these were a bait that was very similar and used, as you can see in some earlier pictures here, that's flopping on top, just like you do a buzzbait. But these particular types, you had to reel fast. You couldn't fish them at different speeds, or it wouldn't work. But and again, if you look at that reel, I said you got to reel fast. I know you probably can't see, but see that tiny little handles that used to be on the reels? Can you imagine? I can't tell you how many times I busted my knuckles trying to reel a lure fast or reel a bass in because those handles were so small. And those were probably at tops 5 to 1 ratio reels back then. And again, a little short handle rod. This is before the long handle rods that dominate fishing nowadays. But Stan was really an excellent angler. What a lot of people didn't know about him, he was one of the best trick casters I've ever seen. He'd go to shows and stuff, and he'd hit targets. He'd flip around people, but he'd do things you didn't think you could do with a casting reel. So he was really a neat individual. I'm going to show you here because I think on some different pages he actually has some more of those type of baits back then, pre-buzzbait baits. If I can find them. There was oh, before we get to that, I know what I fixed to show you is in there. But can any of you recognize what this place is here? Well, it's going to tell you on top. This is actually Johnny Morris's very first Bass Pro Shop. And it was at and of course the story most people nowadays in this part of the country know, it was at a Brown Derby liquor store that his father owned. But this is where he started it all. And you can see here he's having promotions with Giant Spring Sale, with Roland Martin and Bill Dance and other top pros. I found that kind of amusing. Because my very first Bass Pro Shop was the home one there that everybody now goes to, which has actually grown in time. And this is fascinating. This is probably going to be this was above my head even now when I started reading it, because I didn't realize this was actually happening back then, 1972. But nowadays we have GPS, which if you find a spot out there in the middle of nowhere where you can't even see the land, that triangulate water towers and barns, old barns and stuff to be able to refine that spot. They were using techniques called radio fixing. I don't even know what that is. Radio fixing, where you'd be able to go back and find your spot if you couldn't see the bank. Here's all the equipment that you were supposed to have on the boats back then, and magnetic compass, styrofoam markers, radio direction finder. I never have heard that term until I reread this, and I've been bass fishing since then. But they were using some type of technology that they were intelligent enough to use to be able to pinpoint an exact spot out in the middle of the lake. I basically simply used marker buoys and triangulating. And triangulating is again, lining up. Okay, there's a dead tree on the bank. Okay, way behind it is a tower. Come here. Okay, I'm sitting right now on the spot. Now line up something over here, and it was dead accurate. And then you'd mark it with my marker buoys. In fact, I still use marker buoys today, even with the GPS. I have trouble circling the GPS little pin that they put on your map out there, and keeping the right distance from it. Where if I put the marker buoy there, of course I've done it my whole career, I can keep the exact distance I need from it. And there's times when that's critical. When I won the Pickwick FLW tournament here several years back, I made a mistake 2 days in a row of allowing myself to get too close. And once and this is no joke, if I stayed a certain distance, I could get a bite every cast. But when I was fighting one, or the current or the wind would drift me 5 feet closer, they would quit and they would not bite the rest of the day. So that's why the marker buoy to me is so critical. I could put the marker buoy down. I could stay on the marker buoy and triangulate exactly where my cast needed to go. So these are really, really important things that even in 1972, anglers were trying to figure out. They were ordering contour maps, aerial photographs of the lake. And so the U.S. Geological Survey back then, there was not any lake maps back then that had that topography on it. But you could order these U.S. Geological Survey maps, and they were incredibly good, but they were as big as this table. I mean, you might have had to have 10 of them for the whole lake. So it's neat. Nowadays, of course, again, you have mapping on all your electronics. Most people don't even buy a paper map anymore. So here's some of this. Can you figure that out? The azimuths and all that, I'm not going to let you look at it very long because it's all kind of alien to me to figure out how they were marking spots. This I find amusing. Success secrets for Yankee bass. Why is that amusing? Even when I first started fishing the tournaments in 1974, and I left the state of Texas and crossed the state line, I thought the bass were different. When I went to Japan, I thought the bass spoke Japanese. They don't speak Japanese. Bass don't know where the state lines are. They're the same. Their habitats are different, a little different, but they use them the same way. And in other words, it sounds like, but that meant a lot to me. That I didn't have to go to North Carolina from Texas, where I'd fished my whole life, and deal with a different creature. He was the same creature. I had to just pretend I was still fishing for that same bass that I caught on Sam Rayburn in Texas, or on Toledo Bend in Texas, because they're the same. Yeah, their habitat might be different, wood, rock, drop-offs, that type of stuff, but they use them exactly the same way. It was true when I went to fish Lake Biwako in Japan. The bass were the same. So it's just, again, but back then, here's how facts to improve your chances in northern waters. Well, if you've never been to northern waters, just treat them like the same. Now, yes, you go to northern waters, you might be dealing with smallmouth. That's going to be different. If you go to northern waters and in January, February, you're going to have to drill a hole in the ice. So yeah, there are differences, but my overall point is the bass himself is the same. Yeah, again, Florida National here, and this is just confirming, which is the first tournament they had this year at Lake Kissimmee, launches Don't Kill Your Catch. You had to now start having, but it's basically, it says conservationists and fishermen who have applauded the many advances of bass fishing due to bass tournaments, but live with the nagging guilt and tournament fishing that of tournament fishing that may hurt our sport, and that was actually killing our catch. And that guilt is a good word, because even now when you hook one deep and you get the gill and he dies, it hurts. I don't want to kill that little creature. I mean, it's amazing, because he's given me an incredible life. And bass fishing overall has, the tournaments and BAS has innovated most of the best rules we have in fishing. Clean waters, protecting habitat, which is still a battle, because we use this word non-invasive species, and we turn them into little devils running around the lake, sticking pitchforks into everything. And more often than not, about half the time they end up making the fishery better because their habitat, especially the aquatic vegetation. So it's, but still, constructive criticism is really important in life, and it certainly was important to us in the bass fishing world. Anyway, that's the 1972 March, April issue. It was a neat time frame in our career. Catch and release took place.